Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior and welcome back to yet another Mortal Kombat 11 video. Now in today's video we're going to be talking about a rather controversial and problematic issue with the series, retcons. Now retcons aren't exactly anything new to Mortal Kombat or fiction, but it was a very prevalent thing in Mortal Kombat 11. Dare I say something that was oversaturated and in many cases taken way too far. However, in today's video we're going to go over the prevalent characters that have suffered from retcons and whether or not they are really that bad. You see, in many instances in writing, retcons can be beneficial for a character, whether that be scrubbing in a diabolical character's backstory in order to give them a fresh coat of paint, or removing a specific character's history. Don't worry, we'll be getting to that. But in short, retcons can be a double-edged sword, and in many ways can be beneficial for many characters. However, there are a fair few that aren't quite as fortunate. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about characters for Mortal Kombat 11 that got either large or minor changes, and whether or not they're good/beneficial. Now first off, let's actually talk about Kabal. Now Kabal is a strange retcon, and dare I say an unneeded one. You see, Kabal's rebooted origin was in fact something very similar to that of the original continuity. Both worked for the Black Dragons, and both did at one point in time have close ties to Kano. However, the differences between the original and the reboot is Kabal's face turn. Kabal only has a change of heart when he realizes the destruction that Xiao Khan is doing with his extermination squad. When Kabal was caught in the middle of this conflict, he is horrifically scarred, and it's here where he changes sides, leaving the Black Dragons and pushing back against the Emperor. Now in the rebooted timeline there are some tweaks, and some that are in fact beneficial for altering his relationship with the Black Dragons. You see, before the events of Mortal Kombat 3, we do know that Kabal was a long-time loyal member of the Black Dragons, but did eventually sever his ties from the group and reformed himself as an officer of the law with Stryker. Now during the events of the third game, Kabal was horrifically scarred by Kintaro and taken away by his former ally Kano for cybernetic augmentation. Now upon realizing that Kano had not only sided with Xiao Khan, but also was the one to supply him with WMDs, Kabal turns against his former ally and sides with the Earthrealm Defenders. So as you can see, there are some slight tweaks and alterations with rebooted Kabal, but nothing that negatively impacts it. I think this rebooted iteration of Kabal actually benefits from the alteration. It expands on the tragic fate of Kabal and serves as a bit of an origin story for how he got his powers, giving us the viewer a reason to sympathize and be invested in him. Now Mk11 Kabal is where things get a little confusing. So with this iteration of Kabal, it seems like he had absolutely no regrets being part of the Black Dragon clan, and thus remained loyal to them the entire time. This is understandably a bit confusing, as it does contradict the established events of Mortal Kombat 9. Now the biggest inconsistency here with Kabal, outside of what's going on with his origin, is also his speedster abilities. As established, Kabal only went under the knife in order to receive cybernetic augmentations because he had to. It was a life or death situation that he needed to pull through. Now it actually begs the question, if Kabal can go under surgery and acquire this sort of power, without it being a complete fluke mind you, is what's stopping Kano from creating a speedster gang crime syndicate that can acquire power at the blink of an eye? Expensive investment, yeah, but the reward easily outweighs the cost. Now in the greater scheme of things, this retcon isn't too bad. Kabal has never been an integral character to the main story of Mortal Kombat in general, so it's not like his change dramatically impacts the overall narrative. It just means we get another enemy to fight in the story. However, if you are a Kabal fan, I can 100% see this being an issue, as the character has now had 3 different origins, so it can get quite frustrating after a while, especially with his somewhat redemption origin in 9. But once again, it isn't quite as egregious as some other retcons are. It's just a shame that that character development and arc in 9 is just kind of thrown to the wind. Now here's a bit of a strange retcon, Scarlet. My oh my, is this one a bit of a doozy. Now Scarlet is a weird odyssey with how she came to be. A fake rumored arcade character from yesteryear, Scarlet made her main game debut in the Mortal Kombat 9 reboot, being the first of 4 different DLC characters. She was, and still is to this very day, the first new female ninja in the series sporting red amongst the cast. Now Scarlet's origins for Mortal Kombat 9 are extremely unique. Born from blood by the hand of Xiao Khan, she was a natural born killer, with the ability to not only manipulate blood but absorb it through her skin. She was an unstoppable killing machine, so much so that Xiao was forced to restrain her in his Colosseum, as she had the ability to get drunk on blood and quickly quickly spin out of control. So she did have a really cool origin, but she was a DLC character, and thus played no actual big role in the main story. Now please do remember her being DLC, as I will be bringing it up later in a bit. Now from here, Scarlet makes her main continuity debut in the Mortal Kombat X comic book series. I know, we'll get to that. Now in the comic book series, she was aligned with Reiko, who at the time was attempting to unite the Kamidogu daggers that were now tainted with blood magic. Interested with what the blood code could do to her powers, she would assist Reiko in his pursuit for godhood, meaning that she would battle the likes of Devora, Melina, and even Ermac. But by the end of the comic book series, she does have her legs blown out. Now pay attention here because it gets a little bit confusing. After Scarlet made her main roster debut in Mortal Kombat 11, it's revealed that not only was she present during the events of the second tournament, but her origin story has now been changed. In this reinterpretation, instead of being a monster forged by Xiao Khan's hand, Scarlet is now an orphan from Outworld who was adopted by the Emperor. Sensing her magical potential, Xiao Khan would teach Scarlet the ways of the blood code and how to manipulate it and control her enemies. From here, she's known amongst Xiao's pantheon as the Blood Witch. Now there's a number of different factors with this retcon, and a lot that I do have to take into account. The first is her being DLC. So with her not making a main canon debut and only appearing as an add-on, it does make her flexible to adjustments. So it does make sense for a change. However, do I think the orphan origin story is better than the original conceived idea? I can't really say so. The original concept was very cool and very unique for what it was. The ability to drain blood from your enemies and get stronger is a really cool concept and idea. Now, I'm pretty sure this retcon was also done to somewhat dial down the raunchy costumes of Mortal Kombat 9, as her skin was also an important part of her power, so she got a lot stronger by wearing less. Now that's not to say there aren't certainly eye-pleasing skins in Mortal Kombat 11, it's just that this alteration directly affects her from a story standpoint, unlike other characters. So it does feel like this has been done to be a bit of a workaround. Now here are where the retcons also become an issue. Her appearance in the comics is where she made her main series debut, and continuously throughout the comic book run, her origins for Mortal Kombat 9 are touched on, but this all changed very recently. In the early weeks of November 2020, writer Dominic Chanchola of NetherRealm Studios came out and retconned the entire comic book series, making it so the events of the comics never really happen, and only the stuff that's referenced in-game is pseudo-canon. Now, the reason why this retcon was definitely done is to clear up the continuity of Scarlet. It actually helps make things clearer in terms of her origin story. But the one problem here isn't that the retcon just affects Scarlet, but it affects a handful of characters, namely Kotal Khan. It ripped away any redeeming aspect of the character and turned him into a glorified jobber. So by retconning issues away, it actually hurt the very foundation of what it was trying to fix. Now, why was this retcon done? Well, watch this.
Forsake Xiao Khan and follow me.
And why should I serve you, Rain?
Because the blood in your veins is Edenian.
Yep, this has all been done to seemingly have her be Edenian. In hindsight, it's a pretty cool way of seeing how the repercussions of the Outworld War of Edenia not only affected its own realm, but the merging of the two. But in also saying that, we already have two characters that fill that orphan role in the form of Jade and Kitana. Why are we doing this again? Not every female in Mortal Kombat has to be an Edenian or a member of the Special Forces. It's fine to dip your shoes in the rest of the lore that does exist. Want to mix things up? Make her a child of Vaeternus, the realm of vampires that Xiao conquered. Want to make her a new generation character like Cassie Cage? Have her be Nitara's daughter. In Deception, there was in fact a male vampire character that was left on the cutting room floor. Have Scarlet be the daughter of the two if you are going to implement a retcon. And you know what, since this news is actually coming from Rain directly, have it be so she is a child or descendant of a blood god. It's something she's infatuated with and wishes to be, even in her own arcade ladder ending. There's a lot of fixes here that equate to nothing with Scarlet, and it's frustrating to see. What doesn't help is that she's still relatively new and had a clean slate on her debut, but unfortunately after her very first appearance, she's been tampered with to a great degree, and it is a shame. Now, much like Cabal, she doesn't really play that big of an integral role to Mortal Kombat, so in a way I can actually overlook this, but it's hard to ignore the alteration she has undergone in a very short space of time. Now let's touch on a retcon that many may have in fact missed out on, and it actually isn't too blatant: Xiao Khan. Now Xiao's retcon isn't super duper prevalent throughout the story of Mortal Kombat 11, and it is for the most part kind of implemented through some intros. But then again, like most retcons in Mortal Kombat 11, it is a double-edged sword. What was a really interesting addition to his origin was his status as Khan. It seems that upon his betrayal of Onaga, Xiao in fact inherited some of his powers, thus explaining some of the dragon features that he does have in his design for Mortal Kombat 11. I think it's a really neat expansion to the character and shows his ties to the Dragon King despite him being long gone. Now one thing that was a weird change for Mortal Kombat 11 was that in an interview, Dominic Chancholo did say that he dumbed down Xiao Khan's intellect, which is really questionable, especially for someone that's been very important to the series since the very first game. I don't really feel like dumbing down a character that's literally controlled an entire empire, whose entire shtick is, I invade your world and make it mine with my organized forces that I bend to my will, kind of works for the character. It again is such an unnecessary and weird retcon. It just doesn't make sense to me. I do think it was a questionable decision for this alteration to be made. Now mind you, this is in fact a retcon that I learned about him over the course of time. So as I said at the very start, it isn't super prevalent in the game, so I won't dwell on it beyond this. I just find it a very weird change. Now, our next and final retcon should be obvious, and a lot of fans already know where this is going. Sindel. Now, a lot of my personal feelings about Sindel have definitely changed over the course of time, and there is understandably reason behind it, but before I expand on it, let's talk about Sindel, her betrayal in the original timeline, Mortal Kombat 9, and finally 11. In the original timeline, Sindel made her official debut in the third game as a villain, but not one of her choice. You see, Sindel was the mother of Kitana and former wife of fallen Edenian king Jared. Upon their realm's defeat after being beaten in Mortal Kombat, their world was burnt to the ground, and Sindel, along with Kitana, was forced to become part of Xiao's twisted idea of what a family could be. Now, as a form of self-sacrifice to protect the other realms, Sindel took her own life to create a protective field that would prevent Xiao Khan from illegally transversing realms. This forced the Emperor to engage in Mortal Kombat and not his own hand. It was a bittersweet ending for the Queen, as she was victorious in death, that is, until her resurrection. Brought back from the dead via necromancy under Xiao's orders, the Empress lost all control of free will and thus undid the protective spell she cast. It was only during the invasion where she was swayed from the side of evil. As cliche as this might sound, it took the love of her daughter to snap her out of Xiao Khan's control. With this done, she turned on the Emperor with the Earthrealm Defenders, and together they would vanquish him, sending him back to Outworld in a weakened state, freeing Edenia from his grasp, and the royal family would be restored back to its former glory. Now honestly, from this point forward, Sindel only plays a support role for Kitana, acting as a shoulder for her to fall back on in tough times both emotionally and politically, as they do control Edenia together. So Sindel doesn't really do much after this point, and at most only helps Jade help save Kitana from Onaga's influence. But outside of that, she doesn't do much in the main story. Now our next incarnation of Sindel is Mortal Kombat 9. The universe has been reset, and Sindel shares a lot of similarities to that of her original counterpart. Now Sindel isn't the only character guilty of some alterations here, as we have seen with Cabal. Now Mortal Kombat 9 was created during a time where reboots were a super big thing in Hollywood, and thus Mortal Kombat 9 would be given the same treatment, but much like most reboots that do come out of Hollywood, it isn't strictly tied to its core and origins. Instead, it is a reinterpretation of the original film, whilst using the foundation of the first to build on. Now the reboot was ultimately done by Raiden, who sent a message to his past self to alter the future, and thus throughout the game we do see the consequences and butterfly effects that do come from his changes. This was also done from a developmental standpoint to reintroduce the series to a new generation of fans, as well as allow older fans of the series to see something new. One of the big things that actually came out of 9, and has actually greatly impacted the channel, is the intrigue that the start of the game actually introduces. With a previous old existing timeline, it intrigues newer fans and makes them show interest in the older games, so then they can go back and learn about what happened in the original continuity. So it does allow for a unique approach and way of reviving the series. Now, Sindel's biggest change is during the Mk3 section of the game. During Earthrealm's invasion, Motaro is killed, something that doesn't happen in the original continuity, and out of frustration, Xiao Khan infuses Shang Tsung's life force with Sindel, so here she can destroy the Earthrealm defenders, something she is successful in achieving, murdering many of them before she herself is destroyed. This of course leads to her becoming a revenant and being fairly absent for MKX, but of course she does return in 11. Now, to really talk about this, we gotta first talk about the process of how this retcon unfolded. I do largely believe that this is where the retcon received the most backlash, as it really kind of lacked some proper context. So that being said, let's talk about Mk11 Sindel. Now, Sindel wasn't part of the base roster for 11. Sindel was part of the very first combat pack, stuffed with characters that would be instrumental for Aftermath's story, something we didn't actually know till a month before its release in the first quarter of 2020. So when Sindel released, we were met with an extremely out of context character that had seemingly taken an evil turn. We were only able to put the pieces together through her intros and arcade ladder ending, where she pretty much retconned her own canon. So with many of us baffled, we didn't really know what to do except understandably voice our issues with the changes. And then after Final Combat, we were finally greeted with the Aftermath trailer. And as expected, Aftermath is finally where we were given some clarity about this interpretation of Sindel. This Sindel's background is seemingly very different from the one we know. Unlike the beloved queen of her people in the original canon, she is far more cold, callous, and power hungry. During Edenya's fall, it was in fact Sindel that turned on her husband, killing him, driving a knife through his heart, as the Empress had fallen in love with Xiao Khan's empire and power. Now, it's from here where things get a bit hazy, but from what we know, Sindel took Katana and willingly raised her in Xiao's household. Shortly after this time, it's been mentioned in intros that she didn't take her own life, but was instead killed by the necromancer Quan Chi. So the protective ward is actually completely undone here, which in turn not only kind of retcons the original games, but even the new current continuity. So Sindel's entire background was more or less reimagined from the ground up, and it is questionable. Now, that's not to say it's all bad. I actually think that this interpretation of Sindel works extremely well for Aftermath. Her betrayal is fantastic, leading to a very interesting story arc that ultimately is very bold, thrusting the villains into the playable role. It's just sadly ultimately at the expense of Sindel as a character, as she's pivotal in Xiao's release, Earthrealm's defeat, and Kronika's death. That's a heavy burden for one character to carry when they're already established. Now, as I mentioned, does evil Sindel work for Aftermath's story? Yes, she's a fantastic villain. She owns the role of cruel bitch empress. She's likable in that sense. However, there is no overlooking or denying that this was a huge retcon for a legacy character that's been firmly cemented into the series for a long time. Now, this isn't just from a character standpoint, but a continuity one. Her protective ward was instrumental in Earthrealm's defense, so I don't think it's a great idea to throw that away. Plus, that arcade ladder ending is the equivalent of setting on fire your own lore for shits and giggles. It's a super rough way to do it. Having the character actively go out her way to retcon herself was a terrible decision, and without a doubt was going to spark some outrage. But in saying that, Sindel stopped being a pivotal character to the series during the Mk3 section of both timelines. So in many ways, remaking a character that could feel dated could actually benefit her, leading to a more creative story arc for how she can be used, like Aftermath. So I see the argument of both sides, but ultimately I don't think that the Sindel retcon kind of benefits anyone except the DLC story expansion. And don't get me wrong, I really like Aftermath. I like it way more than the base game in its unpredictable nature. It brings a form of surprise that the Mortal Kombat series has been lacking for a long time, and I was invested as it didn't feel vanilla in that sense. It's just a shame it's at the expense of one established character to the lore, and that she's actually pivotal to Aftermath's story. story in that sense. I think opinions are very much so back and forth with Sindel, but I do know that this iteration of the character has grown on people over the course of time. I'm very much so on the fence personally, as I do like Aftermath a lot, but that's a hefty change. But yes guys, that's been it for this long-winded video. I hope you've enjoyed this sit down and discussion about retcons in Mortal Kombat 11. There's a lot of stuff here that isn't as bad as it seems under the banner of retcons, but I think the biggest sin isn't the Sindel retcon, but just how prevalent and forced it is upon certain characters. You shouldn't have to bend a character to make a story work. If anything, it should be the other way around, but alas, it is what it is. Now, what are your thoughts on the retcons of Mortal Kombat 11? Do they bother you? Do they not? What ones do you like, or ones would you change? Please do comment down below. Now, quick announcement before we do finish up here. I do want to let you all know that I'm once again teaming up with former Mortal Kombat 11 writer Shawn Kittlesen to bring you an exclusive video to the channel. Definitely consider this a what if scenario, but he'll be talking about the creation of the story for Mortal Kombat 11, discussing all of the drafts that were in early development, and the fate of one character that I know many of you were interested in, Dark Raiden, something that we of course got a stinger for at the end of Mortal Kombat X, and many are interested to actually kind of get an idea of where that story could have possibly gone. It's not truly cemented in stone, so consider this a what if at best. But I really wanted to get Shawn on to explain the story development process of the Mortal Kombat games and how it actually works, because there's not actually one script. There is a bunch of really crazy, interesting and wacky ideas out there that no one could have expected, like possibly a battle between Outworld and Earthrealm, or the possible return of the Dragon King Onaga. Tune in to find out later this week. I'm really looking forward to it as well. But until then guys, that's been it for me. I do hope you have enjoyed this video and learnt more by doing so. Please support the channel by giving a thumbs up and ticking that bell to stay up to date with all of my content. There's plenty on the way as I am now back from Ukraine, and you definitely don't want to miss out on what I have planned. But now, as always, please comment, like, subscribe and share this video with everyone you know. Please take care, and I'll see you all next time.